The crisp sea air felt like a slap. I stood alone on the polished deck of the marina, the scent of salt and diesel clinging to my cashmere sweater. In the distance, the Wanderlust, the yacht I had paid for, was a shrinking white speck against the azure line of the horizon. I could still hear the ghost of their laughter, a bright, careless sound carried back on the wind. My husband Mark's, his sister Claire's, their children's. A perfect family portrait, sailing away to the private island I had booked for his 50th birthday. My phone was silent in my hand. The last text was from Mark, sent 20 minutes ago. "Sorry, sweetheart. Last-minute mix-up with the charter manifest. Only room for family. We'll meet you at the resort in a few days. Don't worry." But I knew. The finality of that shrinking boat felt less like a mix-up and more like an execution. And all I could hear, echoing in the sudden vast silence, was Claire's voice from a dinner party last Christmas, a smug whisper to a cousin she thought I couldn't hear. "Well, of course, the house is magnificent. Mark did well for himself. She married up, you know. People see the penthouse on Park Avenue, the black Amex, the name on the charity gala invitations, and they write a story in their heads. The story they wrote for me was that of a lucky girl who caught the eye of Mark Redding, a man from a good family with a legacy name. They imagine I was a secretary or a cocktail waitress, plucked from obscurity. The truth is far less romantic, and I suppose far more threatening to their narrative. I didn't marry up. I built the ladder Mark's family used to climb back to relevance. I met Mark when I was 29. I wasn't a waitress. I was a junior partner at a tech-focused venture capital firm I had co-founded. My 20s weren't spent at debutante balls. They were spent in boardrooms, surviving on stale coffee and the thrill of a 4 a.m. coding breakthrough. I had a knack for seeing potential where others saw risk. I poured my life savings, my inheritance from my grandmother, a modest but meaningful sum, into a fledgling software company. When it was acquired, I wasn't just comfortable. I was financially independent for life. Mark was charming, handsome, with a lineage that stretched back to the Mayflower, but a bank account that couldn't stretch to the end of the month. His family had the name, the country club membership, but the textile business that had built their fortune was a dinosaur, gasping its last breaths. He was different from the intense, work-obsessed men in my world. He taught me how to sail, how to appreciate art, how to simply be. I fell in love with the life he represented, a life beyond spreadsheets and stock options. When we married, I saw his family's financial fragility not as a red flag, but as a project. I wanted to help. I loved Mark, and they were his world. I believed that love meant lifting up everyone around you. So, I began to invest. Not with lectures or a condescending business plan, but quietly. I modernized the textile mill's equipment. I funded my new nephew's prestigious college education. I bought the sprawling ancestral home back from the bank when they were on the verge of foreclosure, letting them believe Mark had secured a miraculous loan. I wrote the checks for the family vacations, the new cars, the club dues. I became the silent, invisible engine powering the Redding family fantasy. I never wanted thanks. I just wanted to belong. I thought my quiet contributions were a form of love. I see now they saw it as my dues, the price of admission into their world. The cracks started as hairlines, easy to ignore. It began at dinner parties. I'd offer an opinion on the market, drawing from 2 decades of experience, and my brother-in-law, Tom, would pat my hand and say, "Don't you worry your pretty little head about that, Anna. We've got it covered." Then he'd turn to Mark to discuss the very same topic. Claire, his wife, was the master of the subtle wound. She'd compliment my dress, then add, "It must be so fun to be able to just buy whatever you want without having to think about taste or heritage." My taste was always treated as new, loud, and unrefined, while her family's worn chintz and faded rugs were classic and storied. Then came the planning for Mark's 50th birthday trip. It was my idea, my gift. "Let's do something spectacular," I'd said. A week on a chartered yacht in the Greek Isles. I spent weeks researching, finding the perfect vessel, planning an itinerary that included private tours of ancient ruins and dinners at cliffside restaurants. The family meetings to discuss the trip became weekly rituals of humiliation. I'd present my meticulously planned schedule, and Claire would wave a dismissive hand. "Oh, Anna, that's all a bit touristy, isn't it? We Reddings prefer St. Bart's. It's more us." Never mind that they hadn't been able to afford St. Bart's in 20 years. When I showed them the brochure for the 150-foot yacht I'd chosen, with its elegant cabins and professional crew, Tom squinted at it. A bit ostentatious, don't you think? Our family has always valued discretion. This from a man who drove a Porsche I had made the down payment on. Mark, my dear Mark, would just sit there, mediating. Now, let's find a compromise, he'd say, which was always code for siding with his family. My suggestions were systematically dismantled. Greece became the Caribbean. The yacht I'd picked was swapped for a smaller, more traditional one from a company a friend of theirs owned. The guest list, which I had assumed was just us and the kids, slowly expanded. Claire's cousin was coming, Tom's old college roommate. It was no longer my gift to my husband. It was a Redding family reunion, funded by me. I was relegated to the role of cruise director and bank. The week before we were due to leave, I was sitting with Claire by the country club pool. She was scrolling through her phone, showing me pictures of a new dress she'd bought for the trip. "I just can't wait to get away from it all," she sighed. "Real family time, you know? No distractions." She looked right at me, a sweet, cold smile on her face. The implication was as clear and sharp as a shard of glass. I was the distraction, the outsider, the checkbook that had, inconveniently, been given a voice. I felt a chill despite the blazing sun. I should have listened to it. The morning of our departure was a study in orchestrated chaos. The house was filled with the frantic energy of last-minute packing. Suitcases lined the hallway like silent, judgmental soldiers. I was checking my travel documents for the third time when Mark came into our bedroom, not quite meeting my eyes. He was already dressed in his crisp, white linen shirt, his sailing uniform. "Sweetheart," he began, his voice unnaturally casual. "Slight change of plan." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. What kind of change? "Well, you know how Tom's friend's charter company is a bit old-fashioned?" He fussed with his watch, a vintage Rolex I'd bought him for our 10th anniversary. "There's been a bit of a clerical error. A manifest issue. The Coast Guard regulations are so strict these days." He was rambling, stringing together important-sounding words that meant nothing. "Mark, what are you saying?" He finally looked at me, his gaze skittering away almost immediately. "They overbooked the cabins, and with the crew there's only room for the core family." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Core family. After 20 years, after 2 children I had helped raise, after a home I had saved and a business I had resurrected, I was not core. I was peripheral, an add-on. "So, what does that mean?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "It just means you'll have to fly down and meet us. I've already booked you a commercial flight for tomorrow. You'll be at the resort on Tortola when we dock. It's only a couple of days." A couple of days. He said it so easily, as if it were a minor inconvenience, like a delayed package. He didn't see the chasm opening up at my feet. I looked past him, out the window, and saw the hired SUV pulling up. I saw Claire and Tom loading their monogrammed luggage, their children laughing. They were all in on it. This wasn't a mistake. It was a statement, an excision. "I see," I said. The 2 words were all I could manage. He had the grace to look ashamed, but it was a fleeting, shallow thing. He came over, kissed my forehead. It felt cold, a stranger's touch. "It'll be fine, Anna. Don't make a scene. It's my 50th. Don't make a scene." He was telling me to swallow the blade and smile. He left the room. I didn't move. I heard their voices in the hall, the cheerful calls of goodbye that weren't directed at me. I heard the front door close, then the sound of the car pulling away, and then silence. A profound, echoing silence that filled every corner of the life I thought I had built. I walked to the window and watched the car turn the corner, disappearing from view. I was alone in a 10,000-square-foot house that suddenly felt like a tomb. The abandonment wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet, polite, and utterly devastating. It was the closing of a door, with me on the wrong side. I didn't take the commercial flight to Tortola. The thought of arriving at that resort, feigning a smile, and pretending that being left behind was a simple travel hiccup was impossible. The performance was over. Instead, I packed a single small suitcase with things that felt like mine. A favorite book, a simple silk blouse, my running shoes. I drove my own car, not the chauffeured town car, and headed north, up the coast, with no destination in mind. I ended up in a small, historic town in Maine, the kind with a single main street and a harbor full of weathered fishing boats. I checked into the Grey Gull Inn, an old sea captain's house converted into a hotel. It was the antithesis of the five-star resorts my husband's family favored. It was quiet, dignified, and smelled of lemon oil and old wood. My room overlooked the harbor. For 2 days, I did nothing but watch the tide come in and out, a rhythm that was both relentless and soothing. On the third evening, I couldn't bear the thought of another room service tray. I went down to the hotel's small, dark-paneled bar. It was empty, save for the elderly bartender who was meticulously polishing glasses. He had a kind, creased face and moved with an unhurried grace. I ordered a martini. He made it perfectly, without a single wasted motion. "Rough seas?" he asked gently, placing the drink before me. His voice was a low, gravelly hum. I gave a weak, watery smile. "You could say that." He nodded, not pressing, and went back to his polishing. The silence was comfortable, not awkward. He didn't try to fill it with chatter. He simply allowed me my space. After a while, I found myself talking. Not the whole, sordid story, but pieces of it. I spoke of feeling invisible, of generosity being mistaken for obligation. He listened, his eyes never leaving the glass he was buffing to a perfect shine. When I finished, he set the glass down and looked at me. "There are 2 types of people in this world, ma'am," he said. "Those who build lighthouses and those who are happy to sail by their light. Doesn't mean the lighthouse is any less vital just because the ships don't send a thank you note." The simplicity of it struck me more profoundly than any therapy session ever had. He wasn't offering pity or advice. He was offering a metaphor, a reframing. I wasn't a doormat. I was a lighthouse. I had been a beacon, a source of strength and guidance. The ships had simply taken my light for granted and sailed on. "My name is Arthur," he said, extending a hand over the bar. "Anna," I replied, shaking it. His grip was firm, steady. In that small, quiet bar, a stranger named Arthur didn't fix my problems. He didn't offer a solution. He simply gave me back a piece of my own dignity. He saw me not as a spurned wife or a walking bank account, but as a person deserving of respect. I was a lighthouse, and I realized with a sudden, shocking clarity that I could choose which waters to illuminate. I could turn my light off for the ships that no longer deserved it and save it for my own journey. The drive back to New York was different. The fog of grief had lifted, replaced by a cold, clear calm. I didn't go back to the Park Avenue penthouse. I checked into a suite at the Carlyle and called my lawyer, David Chen. Not the family's estate planner, but my lawyer, the sharp, ruthless litigator who had handled my company's acquisition years ago. "Anna," he said, his voice warm but professional. "I was surprised to hear from you. I assume this isn't a social call." "It isn't, David," I said, looking out the window at the city I had once thought I owned. "I need a complete financial audit of everything. Everything I've funded, guaranteed, or invested in for the Redding family and their business for the past 20 years. I want to know where every single one of my dollars went." "Consider it done," he said, a hint of excitement in his tone. David loved a good fight. 3 days later, I was sitting in his glass-walled office, a thick binder on the table between us. The truth was more staggering than I had imagined. It wasn't just that I had been generous. It was that I was, for all intents and purposes, the entire financial structure of the Redding family. "It's quite simple, Anna," David explained, tapping a highlighted section. "The Redding textile business isn't just propped up by your investments. You are the sole guarantor on its multi-million-dollar line of credit. The loan documents were structured through a holding company that traces back to your premarital trust. Mark doesn't have the authority to make a move without your signature. He probably doesn't even know the specifics. He just knows the money appears when he needs it." He flipped a page. "The Park Avenue apartment? It's owned by the same trust. The deed was never transferred into both of your names. You are the sole owner. Their ancestral home in Connecticut? You're not the co-signer on the mortgage. You are the mortgage holder. They've been paying their mortgage payments to a shell corporation that you own." I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. I had been so focused on being a loving, supportive partner that I'd let the lawyers handle the details, never realizing the sheer, absolute power they had preserved for me. I wasn't just the lighthouse. I owned the damn rock it was built on. As if on cue, my phone rang. It was Mark, back from his trip, his voice laced with a panic he was failing to conceal. "Anna, thank God. Where are you? I just got a call from the bank. They're calling in the business credit line. They said the guarantor pulled support. It must be some kind of mistake. You need to call them. Fix it. I looked at David. He gave me a slight, confident nod. This was the moment. The debt. Not the financial one, but the emotional one they owed me. The years of being dismissed, patronized, and ultimately discarded. It's not a mistake, Mark, I said, my voice as calm and steady as my hand. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. What? What do you mean? I mean, I'm pulling my support, I said. The bank is calling in the loan because the guarantor, that's me, is no longer guaranteeing it. You can't do that, he sputtered. It's the family business. It will be ruined. We'll lose everything. Yes, I said. And then the title of Claire's smug little story came back to me. She married up. It was time to settle that debt. David, I said, turning to my lawyer while Mark was still stammering on the phone. The business loan. What's the outstanding principal? David slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a formidable number. Pay it, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. Pay it off in full, from my personal account, and then dissolve the holding company and sever every financial tie. I want them to have the business free and clear, and I want them to have nothing else from me, ever again. It wasn't an act of generosity. It was an act of severance, a final, clean cut. I was buying my freedom. I observed the fallout from a comfortable distance, like watching a foreign film without subtitles. I didn't need to understand the frantic dialogue. The panicked actions told the whole story. The first indication came via a single, hysterical voicemail from Claire a week later. Anna, you have to call me. The club just suspended our membership. They said the account is in arrears, and the lease company is asking for the Porsche back. Tom is beside himself. What is going on? Mark isn't telling us anything. He just keeps staring at the wall. You have to fix this. I deleted the message without a flicker of emotion. Fix it. That had been my role for 2 decades. I was the family's invisible fixer, the silent provider of their glossy, carefree lives. Now, the machinery had stopped, and they were staring at the silent, motionless gears, utterly baffled. Through the grapevine of New York society, a surprisingly efficient network of gossip, I heard more. The Reading textile business, now debt-free, was also cash poor. Without my constant capital infusions for payroll, materials, and marketing, it was struggling to stay afloat. They had the asset, but not the operational funds. Tom, who had always fancied himself a brilliant strategist, was apparently in way over his head. The Park Avenue penthouse was put on the market by my lawyers. I received a notification when the sale closed. I pictured Mark, packing up 20 years of our life, having to sort through objects and memories, each one a testament to a life he hadn't built himself. I heard they moved into a small, rented condo in Scarsdale. The most poetic justice was the Connecticut ancestral home. My lawyer informed them that their landlord, the anonymous corporation they'd been paying for years, was selling the property. They were given 90 days to vacate. The shock, I was told, was seismic. They weren't homeowners being foreclosed on, they were tenants being evicted. They had been living in my house all along, wrapped in the comforting myth of their own legacy. I never spoke to any of them directly. Mark sent a few pleading, then angry, then pathetic texts, which I blocked. They had wanted a life that was just family. They got it. A family stripped of the wealth they had so comfortably attributed to their own name and Mark's good fortune. They were left with only their heritage and their pride, and it turned out neither could pay for a St. Bart's vacation. They were no longer sailing by the light of my lighthouse. They were adrift in the dark, and for the first time, I felt no compulsion to light the way. I was too busy charting my own course. My new life began not with a bang, but with the quiet, satisfying click of a key in a new lock. I didn't buy another palace. I bought a sun-drenched apartment in a pre-war building in Greenwich Village with a view of crooked rooftops and water towers. It had bookshelves that begged to be filled and a small terrace perfect for a single chair and a pot of verbena. For the first time, a home felt like a sanctuary, not a stage. The emptiness that I feared would swallow me whole was instead a vast, open space, waiting to be filled with things I chose. I enrolled in an Italian language course at NYU, not for any practical reason, but for the pure, unadulterated joy of hearing the musical syllables roll off my tongue. My classmates were an eclectic mix. A retired firefighter, a young dance student, a chef. We didn't talk about assets or last year's gala. We talked about Fellini films and the proper way to make a carbonara. I made my first real friends in years. On weekends, I'd take my old 35mm camera, a gift from my father I hadn't touched in decades, and wander the city. I learned to see again. Not the storefronts of Madison Avenue, but the way afternoon light caught the dust motes in a used bookstore, the intricate pattern of a wrought iron fence, the unposed expressions on the faces of strangers. I found beauty in the small, the overlooked, the authentic. 6 months after I left, I boarded a plane to Florence, not for a whirlwind tour, but to live. I rented a small apartment on the Oltrarno, the artisan side of the river. My days were shaped by a new rhythm. Mornings were for art history lectures, afternoons for getting lost in the Uffizi or wandering through the Boboli gardens. Evenings were for simple dinners at local trattorias, where the owner would greet me by name. I learned the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is a lack, an absence of others. Solitude is a presence, the presence of oneself. I filled my solitude with books, with art, with the taste of strong espresso and the scent of leather from the nearby workshops. I was no longer Anna Redding, the wife, the benefactor, the silent partner. I was just Anna, and it was more than enough. One evening, sitting on my little terrace overlooking the Arno, a glass of Chianti in my hand, I realized I hadn't thought about Mark or his family in weeks. My life wasn't a reaction to them anymore. It was my own creation, built from scratch, and it was a masterpiece in progress. It had been nearly 2 years. 2 years of Florence, of newfound friendships, of a peace so profound it felt like a permanent part of my soul. My connection to the Redding family was a scar, faded and no longer painful to the touch. I thought the door was closed and locked for good. Then, an email arrived. The sender's name made my breath catch: Leo Redding, Claire and Tom's son. The last time I'd seen him, he was a gangly teenager, more interested in his phone than in any family drama. Now he was a sophomore in college, the very college I had been funding. The subject line simply said, "Thinking of you." I hesitated for a full minute, my finger hovering over the delete button. Curiosity, a faint ghost-like emotion, won out. I clicked it open. The email was long, and I read it twice. "Dear Aunt Anna, I don't know if you'll even read this or if this is still your email address. I got it from an old holiday card. I hope this is okay. I've been wanting to write this for a long time, but I didn't know how, or if I even had the right. I'm at NYU now, and living in the city on my own has made me see a lot of things differently. I want to apologize. Not a simple, 'I'm sorry,' but a real one. I was a kid, but I wasn't blind. I heard the things my mom and dad said. I saw how they treated you. I remember that Christmas when Mom made the comment about you marrying up. I was in the next room, and I remember feeling embarrassed. Even then, it felt mean. You were always the one who brought the cool gifts, asked me about my robotics club, and actually listened to my answers. You bought me my first real telescope. I know what happened with the business and the houses. They don't talk about it, but I've pieced it together. They think you betrayed them, but I see it differently now. I think for years they betrayed you, every day, in small ways. The trip to the Caribbean was the final straw, wasn't it? I knew it was wrong when they told me you were flying later. The excuse felt so thin. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I'm not writing on their behalf. This is just from me. I want you to know that someone in the family sees you. Someone knows what you did for all of us and is grateful. And someone is deeply, profoundly sorry for how it all ended. I hope you're happy. Wherever you are, you deserve it. Sincerely, Leo. I closed my laptop, my hands trembling slightly. I walked to the window and looked out at the Florentine sky, a canvas of soft pinks and oranges. Of all the people in that family, it was the quiet boy in the corner who had seen everything. His message wasn't a key to the old door. It was a knock on a new one, a bridge not to the past, but to a possible different kind of future. And for the first time in 2 years, a tear, not of sorrow, but of a strange, complex release, traced a path down my cheek. I let Leo's email sit for a week. I thought about the boy with the telescope, the earnestness in his digital voice. I thought about forgiveness, boundaries, and the tangled threads of family. A younger me would have rushed to reply, seeing a chance to mend things, to be needed again. But the Anna who sat down to write the response was different. She valued her peace more than she valued reconciliation. My fingers typed slowly, deliberately, choosing each word with care. I wasn't writing to a child. I was writing to a young man who had shown the courage to step outside his family's narrative. He deserved the same honesty in return. Dear Leo, thank you for your message. It found its way to me here in Florence, where I have been living for some time now. I was surprised and deeply touched to hear from you. I want you to know that your words mean a great deal to me, more than you can know. To be seen, especially after feeling invisible for so long, is a powerful gift. I accept your apology, not because I need it anymore, but because you gave it so freely and with such sincerity. And I remember the telescope. I remember your excitement about the rings of Saturn. I'm glad you haven't lost that sense of wonder. You are right. The way things ended was the culmination of many years and many small hurts. I have made peace with that past, and a large part of that peace came from letting it go completely. That means my relationship with your parents and your uncle is a closed chapter. It has to be, for my own well-being. It is a boundary I must maintain. But you are not them. Your message was an act of individual character, and I will honor that. I would be very happy to have a relationship with you, Leo, on our own terms. A relationship that is not about the past, but about the present, about who you are becoming and who I have become. If you're ever in Italy, the door is open. We can talk about art or robotics or the rings of Saturn. Until then, work hard at school, be kind, and continue to trust that voice inside you that knows the difference between what is right and what is easy. With my warmest wishes, Anna, I hit send and felt a sense of quiet completion. It was not a grand gesture of forgiveness, nor was it a bitter refusal. It was a choice. I was choosing to cultivate a new, small garden rather than trying to reclaim a poisoned forest. My life was no longer defined by what I had lost or what I had escaped. It was defined by the scent of coffee from my kitchen, the weight of a history book in my hands, the sound of a friend's laughter, the promise of a conversation with a young man who had the courage to see the truth. I had not married up. I had not even bought my freedom. I had finally, simply, come home to myself. And from here, I could see the whole world. If Anna's story of reclaiming her power and finding her peace resonated with you, please let us know in the comments. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own happiness? We'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about strong women rewriting their own narratives. Your support helps us bring these stories to light.